In this section, we're going to analyze finally those controls that are going to allow us to create our applications with .NET Maui, and we can group these controls in different categories that we're going to see throughout this section. Let's start with the presentation controls, which are those controls that are going to allow us to improve the graphical interface or that are going to allow us to display some type of information to the user without the user necessarily having to have some type of interactivity with these controls. We're going to create then a new project to which I have called Controls Demo. I'm going to proceed to create this project, and once the project has been created, we're going to create a new content page. And we're going to call it, for example, Presentation Controls Demo. It is going to be the content page with which we are going to work these presentation controls. Let's go to app.xaml.cs and let's indicate that we want this page to be the initial page. The first presentation control that we're going to see as part of the content page is a control called Box View. We're going to leave the stack layout as part of the content page, and we're going to write the term box view. This way, we can visualize how this control is going to be seen by default in the application. Let's start the execution of the application. Here we can see the application, and as we can see, no control is seen as part of the graphical interface, so we must assign some additional properties for our box view to be seen. The properties are, for example, one called background color. To set the background color, we're going to assign a black color for this box view. And we can see that still no control is visible. This is happening because we must also set the height request property. Let's indicate then that we want the control to have a height of 200 units. And now we can see the control as part of the application. This control is going to serve us when we want to place some type of background, for example, in the application or when we want to carry out the separation between two different sections. These are some of the uses that we can give to this control. The following control that we're going to analyze is a control called Label, which surely you have noticed in some previous demonstrations. This control is going to serve us to show text to the user so that he can read it without needing to carry out some type of interaction. The control has a property called text, to which we assign the text that we want to show to the user. It also has some additional properties, such as the color of the text. It has some attributes for the font, as in this case we are applying an attribute for the font to be a bold font. We also have the ability to set the font size, and in this specific case we have different options for this value. We see some default options that refer to a specific size that will be displayed as part of this control. The advantage of using these values from this list is that the value is going to be determined according to the device we are on. That is, if we are on a mobile device, the value will be adapted for that mobile device, while if we are on a tablet, the value will be increased so better display the font on that device. We could then use any of these values, or if we need to, we could use a numeric value, as we see in this case. The recommendation is that you use one of the preset values. We can also assign a property, for example, to determine where to place the text. Previously, we had seen some properties such as horizontal options and vertical options. But in this specific case, when we set horizontal text alignment, we refer only to the text that will be part of the label control, and in this case we are setting the value center. That is, we want the text to be centered. Let's see how the changes look in the emulator. We can see that the label has the characteristics we have set. If we change, for example, the color to an aqua color, we save the changes, we can see how the font color has changed according to the color we have set. Let's change the color back to a black color. Undoubtedly, it is one of the controls that we're going to use the most. Another control that is also part of the framework, which has to do with drawing geometric figures, is a control called Ellipse, which we will use when we want to draw ellipses. For example, if we want to show a user profile, if we want to show some kind of graph or some similar element, we can use this ellipse control. Unlike the box view control, we do not set a background color, but in this case we determine what is going to be the fill of the ellipse through the property called fill. And in this case, we are assigning a dark red color for this value. We can also set if we want this figure to have some kind of contour through the stroke property. In this case, we are determining that we want a dark green value for the outline of the figure. We can indicate how thick the outline is going to be. We can determine the height request and set properties like horizontal options and also it width request to determine how wide we want this figure to be. If we save the changes, we can see the ellipse type geometric figure being drawn as part of the application. As part of the controls that we can use, there is the line control, which will allow us to draw lines. We must specify a stroke to determine the color of that line. We're going to specify the coordinates from where we want the line to start. In this case, we indicate that we want it to start at the coordinate 0, 0, and we want it to reach the coordinate 100, 50. We also set the stroke thickness to determine how thick the line will be, and in this case we are specifying a value of 10. We save the changes, preview the application, and see that the line we have specified is already being drawn. Another geometric figure that we can draw is the geometric figure called rectangle. We can specify a fill for this geometric figure. We determine some additional properties such as stroke, the stroke thickness, which we have already seen above. We set the height, the width, the horizontal options, and in case we need some kind of rounding at the corners for the rectangle, we can do it through its pair of properties called radius x and radius y. In this example, we set a value of 10 for each of the corners. Let's save the changes. And we see that in the emulator is already being drawn this rectangle with the characteristics we have specified. As part of the geometric figures that we have available in .NET Maui, we also have the figure called polygon. For this figure, we establish a fill, and in the specific case of a polygon, we must establish a set of different points that will allow us to draw the geometric figure. If we analyze each of the values that are part of the points of this geometric figure, we will see that we have them in even values. That is, we have a pair of coordinates, then a space, then another pair of coordinates, a space, and so on. This creates the drawing area for each of the points that we want to be part of the polygon. Similarly, we determine through the stroke property what will be the color of the line we are going to draw, and the stroke thickness to determine how thick the line will be. This is the geometric figure that is being drawn as part of the application. I'm going to paste a second example for a polygon type figure, and in this example we indicate that the fill is going to be a yellow color. We specify a set of points as well, and additionally we specify different properties that are going to allow us to draw the outline of the figure. For example, we set format to draw a dashed line, the distance of separation of the lines, and let's see how this example looks in the emulator. Here we see how this geometric figure we have specified is displayed. We see that the outline of the figure is not formed by a straight line, but is formed by a dashed line. Also, as part of the geometric figures that we can draw a figure called polyline. We see that it also contains a set of different points which are being determined in this points property, and we have indicate that we want a stroke equal to red. Let's see how this looks in the emulator. And here we can already visualize this control called polyline, which follows the drawing according to the points that we have been specified as part of the SAML file. I am going to carry out the pasting of another polyline control so that you can see another type of graphics that you can draw with this control. We save the changes, and unfortunately, as part of the graphical interface, we can no longer see this control that we have added to the stack layout because it is positioned below the page boundary, and therefore it is being hidden because we cannot scroll the page up. There is a way to add a scroll bar in a simple way. What we're going to do is to group this stack layout inside a view called scroll view. We are going to close the tag, and we are going to place the stack layout just inside this scroll view element. With this, we're going to save the changes, we return to the emulator, and in this way, we can scroll the page to the top, and now we can see the polyline type figure that we have drawn previously. Another figure that we can use as part of the application is a figure called path. And in the case of a path, we must specify a different set of data. We will use a property called aspect so that the figure is displayed in a uniform way, and we must fill in the information of this property called data, which contains a set of different values including even different letters. The creation of figures through paths is a little more complicated, and regularly we are going to use some external tools to carry out this drawing. With these lines that we have added, let's see how it looks in the emulator. And we see that we are drawing this figure that can be seen here thanks precisely to our path element. Another element that we can use as part of the graphical interface is an element called border that will allow us to add a border to any graphical element that is part of the .NET Maui framework. In the example on the screen, we indicate that we want to create a border on a label element. If we visualize the changes, we see that at the bottom of the application, we have the label control with the text we have specified. However, we cannot see the border yet. This is because we must designate a set of properties for this to work correctly. Here I have pasted some properties. For example, we need to define a stroke. We need to indicate how thick that line is going to be. We need to specify if we want a background for the border, if we want a padding where that border is going to be placed, and also very important, we must specify a property called stroke shape that basically will serve to indicate what type of border we want to establish. In this example, we indicate that we want to use a rounded rectangle, and because this control has a property called corner radius, we can specify a rounding for each of the corners. With the change we have made, we can see that we already have the label element, and around it the border that has been successfully applied according to what we have indicated. We see then this nice border, which has the rounding and the background that we have set, and also the color that we have indicated for the border. Also, as part of those presentation controls, we have a control that you're probably going to use a lot, which is the control called image, which we can use by assigning an origin for the property called source. And this source is going to be a reference to one of the images that are inside the resources folder and the folder called images. For example, we're going to use this .NET bot image, and we can see how the image has appeared as part of the graphical interface. As part of the properties of this image, we have a very important property, which is the aspect property, which will allow us to determine how an image is going to be seen according to the container in which it is located. If we want to fill the entire container in which it is, if we want to fill the space but keeping the aspect ratio, if we want to center the image, or if we want to fill the entire content of that container. We are also going to talk about a control called frame, which will give us a card type format. We can use it in this way, and regularly inside the frame tag, we're going to place some kind of content. In this case, I am going to place the content of the image that we have previously created. I am going to also, as part of this frame, to determine a margin of 5 units, and this is the format that we have when we create a frame control. I hope it looks good. We see a frame with a shading that is containing the image that we have determined. We can apply a set of additional properties to the frame. For example, we could change the background color. Let's indicate that we want a blue color. And another very important property is the padding property, which is the spacing between the internal content and the boundary of the frame control. We can specify, for example, a somewhat high property, for example 10, so that this example looks good. And here, we can appreciate how the visual appearance of the frame element has been modified. It is already a little better appreciated. Finally, we also have a control called web view, which will allow us to place a URL to display a website as part of the application. In this case, we are indicating a head for this web view control, and as part of the source for this application, we are indicating an URL. Let's see how this looks in the application. And we see that at the bottom, we are already displaying this website as part of the application without doing anything additional. These are the different presentation controls that we're going to be able to use when we create graphical interfaces with .NET Maui.